Here we are again. I need to get on with this book because I've got to keep my public happy. And here's two of my public. And here is, of course, the book that is drawing to a close, but there's still a few episodes to go, so you needn't worry yet. All you need is a little bit of patience for the younger ones, and the older ones will need, as time goes on, a hanky, probably. Because, where are we? Where are we indeed? Who's that? T.M. Powell sat up with a start. Where was he? Ah, yes, in the long house of the Americans, with the many beds and windows. The sun was streaming through the windows. It was silent in the room. He was all alone. But where was Glory of the Republic? T.M. Powell lunged to the edge of the high bunk. There was nothing under the bunk. There wasn't a sound anywhere in the room. Where was Glory of the Republic? Maybe the Americans had butchered him. Oh no, they wouldn't do that, would they? Would they do that? Naked as he was, T.M. Powell tumbled out from the high bunk and tore through the empty room and out of the door, calling and calling Glory of the Republic. Oh, there was Glory of the Republic in the yard. T.M. Powell went limp with relief. There he was in a tipped-over barrel in the compound, roped to the barrel. T.M. Powell flew to his little pig. And since Glory of the Republic couldn't get out because of the rope, the naked T.M. Powell crawled into the barrel with him to hug and pet and comfort him. The enormous relief made him silly. They hadn't butchered Glory of the Republic. He might have known. They'd given him a very proper barrel house with straw in it. Suddenly, the interpreter stood before the barrel. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at that barrel. And there's the interpreter. Suddenly stood before the barrel. He was indignant. No, you are not to run outdoors naked. Your 60 fathers would be horrified. In America, people do not run out of doors naked, not even boys. I suppose because they have plenty of clothes. T.M. Powell sat up in the barrel. Oh yes, my 60 fathers. They are like fathers to me, aren't they? Ah, but you don't know the full extent of it yet. The men of the 16th Bombardment Squadron, that is what your 60 fathers are called, last night adopted you because you helped save the Lieutenant Hampson and have no father and mother and are lost and starved. T.M. Powell looked at the man in stunned bewilderment. 60 fathers? And I'll live in the longhouse with them? But I have a father and a mother. The house is called a barracks, the interpreter evaded. I don't want 60 fathers, T.M. Powell exploded. I have a father and a mother. Oh, I'm not ungrateful, he added hastily, but don't you understand? I have a father and a mother, and I must find them, and the baby sister. I have to find them. Yes, the interpreter said uncomfortably. But where? You must face it, T.M. Powell. Where in all China? When there are thousands upon thousands of lost war children like you. I can tell you, you are extraordinarily lucky to be picked up by the Americans and now be adopted by them. Of course, this isn't permanent, only until such time as your father and mother are found. He added weakly, the men will do all they can to help you find them, but until then you will have to live with them. And I can tell you, he coaxed, you'll live like a prince. You should be thankful. I am thankful, Tien Pao whispered, but his lips trembled. He stared out before him. And yesterday, when I could have watched for them coming down the railroad, I fell asleep, he said aloud to himself, and when I awoke, I thought only of my hunger and went with the two Americans. The interpreter shrugged helplessly. You must face it. It is most unlikely. It would be the smallest chance. The railroad is but one road out of Hengyang. There are other roads, and so many homeless people, hordes of them. You shouldn't feel guilty and reproach yourself. I knew there were other roads, Tien Pao said somberly, but I also knew, if I watched from the rock, they would come around the bend of the railroad track. First my father, and then a few steps behind him, my mother, carrying the baby sister. Beauty of the Republic. I knew that, but I slept. Tien Pao, you are accusing yourself for nothing. All that was little more than a hopeless hope. And I'm a poor comforter, and I don't know what to say. Anyway, you shouldn't be in the barrel, and you must get back to bed. The doctor ordered it. Tien Pao stubbornly shook his head. No, I'm going back to the rock. There still must be people coming. Those yesterday must have been the first ones. And the guerrilla chief told me that my father and mother would wait for me in Hengyang until the last. So they would be among the last. And then they'd still be coming. And I believe that because I have to believe it. He grabbed Glory of the Republic's rope in nervous haste. Don't you see that I must get back to watch for them? He urged. Where are all the fathers? He was behaving badly, ungratefully. Somehow he couldn't help himself. Something inside him seemed to be driving him, making him say things, pulling him back to the rock to watch. The men are at work at the airfield. Or they're on a bombing run. Anyway, they won't be back until evening. The interpreter half turned at the sound of a jeep, as if hoping it might be some of the Americans to help him out of his difficult situation. It was the doctor. He came striding across the compound, straight to the barrel. The interpreter stood before the officer doctor in an apologetic half bow, evidently explaining why Tien Pao stood naked in the yard instead of being in bed. Tien Pao watched the doctor anxiously. Now the doctor would order him back to bed. He'd run away, back to the rock. He'd slip out of bed the moment the doctor was gone and the interpreter was busy. But where were his clothes? Where are my clothes? What did you do with them? Something inside him seemed to be urging him to yell it at the interpreter, but the doctor was talking so earnestly. And while waiting for the doctor to finish, Tien Pao evolved a shrewder plan. He wouldn't ask for his clothes. It would make them suspicious. He'd go willingly to bed, but the moment they were out of the room, he'd hunt for his clothes. and if he couldn't find them, he'd wrap himself in one of the blankets that lay folded at the foot of every bunk. Free Glory of the Republic and sneak out to the rock. Tien Pao began surreptitiously undoing the knot in Glory of the Republic's rope. The interpreter turned to him. Now, listen to this. I was all wrong. The doctor thinks it would be good for you to go to the rock and to watch for your parents. Now, I do not know whether I'm to tell you all this. These Americans are babying you so, but you'll have to face it sooner or later. And you've faced so much I think you can handle this too. Well then. This doctor thinks you are acting the way you are, because as yet you can't face up to the fact that you have come to the end of the road. All these days and nights you believed you were going back to your father and mother, but now there remains but the small, forlorn hope that you may still find them by watching from the rock. But as I said before, where in all China among the thousands? Of course it is true there is a chance they might come down that railroad track, and while there's just a little hope. The interpreter fell silent as he poked around in his mind, trying to find the right words. I don't know whether I say the right things, he said unhappily. In the middle of the night I woke up and lay thinking long, Tien Pao told the man gravely, and I thought all those same thoughts. They were hard thoughts to think, but I thought them through, and that is why I must go to the rock to watch for my parents until the last refugee from Hengyang has passed. The interpreter drew a big relieved breath. Then if you understand it, the doctor says he will take you out to the rock in his jeep. I'm to get your clothes and fix a small lunch so that you can stay there all day. The interpreter hurried away. Tien Pao walked up to the doctor and quietly laid his cheek against the man's hand. It had to express all his gratitude. Then he busied himself with the knot in Glory of the Republic's robe. Now look at this. The interpreter was back. Last night while you slept, your 60 new fathers had me trot to the village that lies beyond the airfield to buy shoes and underwear for you. And look at this. They had me sit up most of the night, cutting down one of their uniforms to your size. They want you to be in American uniform, exactly like theirs. Tien Pao stared at it. It is all too much, it's too much, he stammered brokenly. And I have been an ungrateful wretch. It is too much. But he was dithering with impatience to get into the bright, clean uniform. And when he was dressed, he looked proudly down at himself and twisted his head every which way to see every part of the smart, sharply pressed uniform. The doctor stepped back several paces to admire him properly. He threw Tien Pao a smart salute. Tien Pao laughed excitedly, but his face immediately straightened again. He looked anxiously at the doctor. I am an ungrateful wretch, he mumbled shamefacedly. But how soon are we to go? Can we go to the rock? You're not a wretch, the interpreter said, stepping back, proud of his own handiwork. We understand. The doctor understands. The sun is shining, Tien Pao told the doctor in Chinese to explain his dreadful driving hurry. A whole long day. I can watch, and watch without any hunger, and I have slept a whole long night. He took the doctor's hand and gripped it, but it was to hurry the man to the jeep. The interpreter got into the back of the jeep. He had a paper carton with Tien Pao's lunch in it, and a huge paper bag with potato peelings for Glory of the Republic. Tien Pao laughed delightedly and stroked the creased trousers of his new uniform. Everybody here is wonderful, even to my pig. If that were all, the interpreter said. But the doctor has planned a great surprise for you late this afternoon when he comes back with the jeep to take you from the rock to the barracks. He does not want you to walk the distance. By that time, your 60 the men should be back at the barracks too. They are my 60 fathers, Tien Pao said gravely. I was very bad there in the barrel. 60 fathers and a house. And my pig has a barrel with straw. He laughed exultantly. But he turned from the interpreter, and the laugh erased itself. He knew only too well why the doctor had planned a surprise. The doctor did not expect him to have found his father and mother when he came back with the jeep to take him from the rock. In English, the interpreter repeated what Tien Pao had said, and the doctor nodded and smiled. But Tien Pao was relieved when at that very moment he saw the rock. He pointed to it excitedly. There was his rock, and there lay the railroad track. And, marvellously, people were still coming down the track. Oh, not many at this moment, but they still straggled along. And there now came a whole party of 10 round the bend. The doctor stopped the jeep, and Tien Pao got out with Glory of the Republic and his bag and carton. He hesitated. Would the good doctor wait until I am on top of the rock? These people are hungry, and my pig is food. Oh, we'll wait, the interpreter promised, without even asking the doctor, and the doctor nodded his head. He understood. We'll wait, he said with a grin, imitating the interpreter. Tien Pao had lain on the rock for hours. The sun had gone over. And was shining in his face now. The afternoon was passing. The sun shone bright and clear on the tracks below. Tien Pao lay concealed between a couple of huge boulders. An old woman passed along the track. He could almost count the deep wrinkles in her old face. But she was not a woman who had come far. She merely came down the track with a basket of grass that she had cut. She was full of wrinkles. Tien Pao looked into the afternoon sun. There was nothing to watch on the track. He was hungry. The lunch had been eaten long hours ago. It had not taken long. 1 thin slice of bread, a little jar with milk, and a small banana. The sweet taste of lovely banana still lay along Tien Pao's tongue. He tasted it again by poking the tip of his tongue between his teeth. Glory of the Republic had finished the bag of peelings hours ago, had eaten the bag, and now he was eating Tien Pao's carton. Tien Pao wiped his eyes, which were blurred from his sun staring. He could hide it from himself no longer. The endless procession of homeless stragglers from Hengyang had stopped. Oh, now and then a little family group still came jogging around the bend, but mostly those who passed were old people, slow old people who walked a little, rested a little. They'd just suddenly sit down on one of the rails and sit and stare without raising their heads. Tien Pao thought he heard voices. He waited, but nothing came around the bend of the railroad track. T.M. Powell anxiously stared at the sun again. Again he thought he heard voices. At last an old man came around the bend all by himself. He was talking loudly to himself. In the clear sunlight, T.M. Powell could see the old stumps of teeth as he talked. Let's have a look. Below the rock, the old man abruptly sat down. He searched himself as if for food. He moaned a little. On top of the rock, T.M. Powell felt miserable with him, feeling just what the old man felt. If he hadn't eaten everything, he could at least have thrown the banana down in the carton. But Glory of the Republic had eaten even the carton. The old man was pushing himself up again to stagger on. Glory of the Republic wasn't in any danger from him. The old man couldn't possibly climb the rock. T.M. Powell stood up. "Grandfather," he called down, "are you from Hengyang?" "Eh?" The old man was startled. "You frightened me." "Lad," he said, when he had at last located T.M. Powell. "Yes, I am from Hengyang." "Why?" "Are there more coming, more families? Are there a lot more people who possibly waited until the last and did not leave until after the Japanese had taken most of the town?" T.M. Powell held his breath. "It seemed to me I was the last one," the old man said slowly. "It seemed to me I was so slow. They all passed who were once behind. Did a small family pass you? A tall man with big strides? A young mother carrying a little female child?" The old man spread his hands wearily. "My son, those are foolish questions. There were so many." "Yes," T.M. Powell said in a small voice. The old man started on, but then he turned again. "Grandson, have you anything to eat up there? I hunger." T.M. Powell mournfully shook his head. The old man pressed his lips together and moved on. After the brief talk, the silence on the rock and along the whole railroad track seemed to close in completely. A choking feeling lumped in T.M. Powell's throat. It was no use fooling himself any longer, and he had known it all along. It was helpless. It was hopeless. He'd know it all along. They wouldn't come. They had either passed by or had gone along some other road to almost anywhere. Still T.M. Powell stayed on the rock. He could not seem to get himself to go back to the barracks of the white soldiers. The going down the rock, the going back to the 60 men, would somehow prove that his mother and father were gone, and that all hope was gone. T.M. Powell tried not to think, tried not to look down the empty railroad track. He made himself admire his uniform once more. He made himself very busy brushing the dust from it. He stroked and creased the trousers back into a press, patted them smooth. He felt a lump. There was still another pocket he had not found before. So many pockets in these strange clothes. T.M. Powell poked in the pocket. His mouth fell open as he withdrew a wad of Chinese yen notes, a roll of money. Not only had they given him a new uniform, they had stuffed it with yen. Truly, these amazing Americans did not know the value of yen. Tim Powell started to count. Suddenly, he ran to the outer edge of the rock. "Grandfather! Grandfather!" he called out as loud as he could. He knew real, deep, hopeless hunger and what it did. He'd give the old man much yen for food, for a big meal, and then for meals tomorrow and the next day. "Grandfather! Grandfather!" The old man had passed out of hearing. The huge rocks along the railroad track mocked back, "Grandfather! Grandfather!" like an echo. Tim Powell looked at the sun. Should he run after the old man or wait until sunset? There was no one on the rock anyway. He turned for a last look, and then his heart stopped cold. Around the bend came a tall man striding, and behind him a stooped woman came. A baby was on her back. Tim Powell trembled. His skin went cold. With shaky hands he rubbed his blurred, smarting eyes. He kept his fists there in his eyes. He did not dare to make sure. Wait a tiny moment. Catch his breath. He couldn't breathe. His heart pounding, Tim Powell dropped his fists a little, tried to stare over them, tried to find just the baby. He'd know by the baby. But if he looked first at the woman, and if it was his mother, he'd plunge straight down the rock to get to her. He knew he would. He saw the man first. It wasn't his father. It was another family. Tim Powell turned his back so he would not have to see the woman with the baby pass. He stood, wooden and completely empty, waiting for the sound of their scuffling feet to fade. After this little family was gone, he'd go back to the house of the 60 fathers, the barracks. He could not go through this again. Suddenly the man was yelling up at him. "Boy, up there, did I hear you calling your grandfather? Did you lose your grandfather?" Tim Powell could not answer, could not turn at once. The whole little family must be waiting. He heard no scuffling of feet. At last Tim Powell turned. Just the man was waiting. The woman had kept walking, and for that Tim Powell was thankful. "Are you from Heng Yang?" he managed to ask the man. "No, we're from a village many lie this side of Heng Yang. The Japanese are now holding all of Heng Yang and are beginning to move again. They are coming on." "Beyond Heng Yang?" Tim Powell said, stunned. Did you anywhere pass a little family just like yours from Heng Yang? Just like yours?" The man looked up. "Your family?" Tim Powell nodded. "I'm sorry, son, nothing like that. All we passed from Heng Yang were a few old and sick and dying, the stragglers." "But you were calling out for your grandfather. Did you lose your grandfather too?" Tim Powell dumbly shook his head. He could talk no more. The man still stared up, and Tim Powell knew. He was curious about the uniform, but too polite to ask. He said nothing, and the man moved on to catch up with his wife. He took long strides. Now Tim Powell could not stay on the rock. It was too awful staring at the silent, empty railroad track. It was over. It was done. The Japanese had the whole country around Hengyang. Nobody was coming from Hengyang anymore. Tien Pao grabbed up Glory of the Republic and slithered and plunged down the steep path. He ran down the little dirt road, but suddenly he turned and charged back to the railroad track and ran hard along the track. The young family was gone, but the old man still groped along. Shall we? Tien Pao caught up with him. He stuffed yen into the hand of the astonished old man. "For your hunger, grandfather," he panted, "to buy much food." "It will go well with you, my son. It will certainly go well with you," the old man said fervently. Tien Pao turned and ran back along the railroad track to the little dirt road below the rock. And now we'll leave Tien Pao again as he heads